Okay.
Muted.
Started. Most of you know me, but my name is Mike Bottorff. I am the Director of Technology for Nineveh Hensley Jackson United School Corporation. And we are looking to procure new one-to-one student computing devices. We are already one-to-one, but our existing devices are in their 4th year and either at end of life or beyond end of life. So this process that we've gone through is to plan appropriately for replacing those devices and creating a more effective refresh cycle going forward. So the agenda briefly, welcome and introductions. Since everyone's attending remotely, I won't go around the room and do introductions, so I'll just welcome you. Thanks for attending. And if you plan to, for those of you who check in with the recording after it's posted on the website, thank you for doing that as well. The bulk of the session will be me walking through the RFP and associated documents, really hitting the highlights and key elements that vendors would want to know as they prepare their response. After that, I'll recap the evaluation criteria and our process and talk about next steps. And then we should still have time at the end for questions. Despite the loss of time, I think we'll still make it through. So this is just a snapshot of the RFP documents, but I will go ahead and close out of the presentation and actually pull up the documents themselves, and we'll walk through them that way. So as I'll do a few times throughout this presentation, please let me know through the chat box whether you're seeing the proposal document on your screen in the screen share. It should be, it's a Word document. It says Nineveh Hensley Jackson United School Corporation at the top. So please go ahead and type in the chat window. Let me know if you're seeing it. Okay, very good. Thank you. So this starts with just a brief cover letter. Says, hey, we're looking to purchase student one-to-one computing devices, and we'd like interested and experienced vendors to respond. This next page is more of just a cover page. It's kind of an overview of the RFP. It identifies what we're requesting. So we're requesting a proposal, one hard copy and one electronic copy. We try to be sensitive to saving paper, so one physical copy will suffice. The electronic copy can either be emailed to me directly, or it can be submitted with the physical copy in the form of a flash drive or something of that nature. The issue date, February 24th, last Friday. The bid opening is March 6th at noon. That's next Monday. And I apologize for the short turnaround time. We're on a tight timeline, and we had some things delay the release of the RFP that were unanticipated. That said, we've tried to make it as simple and clean and straightforward as possible to respond to it. The bulk of the response will be the vendor response forms, which is where you provide your narrative about your company and what you offer, and then the price proposal, which was where you include the cost for the devices. So there are some other documents associated, but that's the bulk of it, and hopefully you'll find that very simple to complete and submit, even in the short time frame. So as I mentioned, we're looking for primarily student one-to-one computing devices and then associated services, which I'll talk more about as we go through this. This is just an outline of the sections of the proposal. So there are 4 sections here in this part 1 of the RFP. Part 1 is effectively the narrative portion of the RFP that describes what we're looking for. And I'll go through each of those sections in turn. And then the response documents simply provide the list of the things that should be included in your response, so you can check through those before you submit it. Last element here on the cover page is about written questions. And so I'm happy to accept written questions. What we'll do is we will gather those up, write detailed responses to them, and post those to the official site for all RFP documents. So that's our technology page on our school website, listed here at the bottom. If you still have questions after this pre-proposal conference, and after the Q&A, then please go ahead and submit those in writing. And as long as you get them to me by today, we'll get answers out to you tomorrow. We're going to do that tomorrow morning. So let's dive into the RFP itself. Section 1, purpose and background. As I mentioned, we're looking to primarily procure new one-to-one computing devices, and we're also interested in looking at associated services, which I'll talk more about that as we go. And this section 1.1 essentially just provides an overview and explains that there is no guarantee that we're going to award a specific contract or purchase specific things. Standard RFP language, essentially. General background, as some or all of you know, we are a rural public school district south of Indianapolis. We serve about 1,800 students, so we're not super large by any means. We are also currently, as I mentioned, a one-to-one environment. We utilize iPads in grades K through 2 and in grades 6 through 12. We currently use Dell Chromebooks in grades 3 through 5. And the important thing to note, although it probably won't affect your response in any way, is that this particular RFP is strictly for grades 6 through 12. The K through 2 elementary school and the grades 3 through 5 intermediate school have selected alternative routes for their device refresh, and so this proposal only applies to grades 6 through 12. The other important thing to note, as described here in section 1.3, is we convened a team last fall to evaluate our options for devices and to also assess how we wanted to use one-to-one and computing devices in the classroom, what we can improve on, what were our long-term goals. And so this group of teachers, administrators, superintendents, and special educators have been working on this for about 5 months. They've conducted a lot of due diligence on the various platforms, and we also visited at least 6 other school corporations to see the various devices in action. We considered the iOS and iPad devices. We considered Chromebooks, Windows devices, and MacBooks as well. For grades 6 through 12, after this entire process, for grades 6 through 12, the evaluation team decided to adopt the Chrome platform and selected 3 finalist Chromebooks, that being specific makes and models for this RFP process. And our goal is to identify a preferred Chromebook and potentially additional services and get those devices in hand before the end of the school year so that we can get them set up and prepared for this coming fall. Section 1.4 here just reviews the timeline. Right now we're at the pre-proposal conference, February 27th. As I mentioned earlier, written questions need to be in sometime today. We'll put together our responses to those tomorrow. If there are written questions, we'll respond to them as thoroughly as necessary. I am somewhat hoping that we cover everything here in this pre-proposal conference, and then those follow-up questions are minimal. The proposal response deadline, March 6th at noon. And again, I apologize for the short turnaround, but we're facing deadlines here to get this rolling, so that's what we have to do. That said, the receipt of the hard copy proposal is noon next Monday, so just keep in mind that you'll need to have that out by whatever delivery service you choose by probably Friday or Monday for us to get it. The reason, too, for the noon time is that we plan on evaluating the proposals that very afternoon. We're going to plug in the costs and start reading through the documents immediately, and we anticipate having most of our evaluation completed at that time. And as you can see, then our subsequent goal is to have a contract award by March 14th, and we'll present to our board at that time. Certainly there are many various unexpected things that could occur that would push that back, but that is our goal for now. And if those, if something happens that pushes that timeline back, we will adjust accordingly. And the remainder of this section, as I mentioned, talks about written questions, pre-proposal conference, and posting answers to the written questions. Those will be posted again on the district technology website, and I will likely send out an email notifying folks that those questions or those answers have been posted. Section 2, scope of procurement. So this is essentially the equipment and services we're looking for. This section describes it, hopefully in sufficient detail. As I mentioned, our evaluation team selected 3 makes and models for student computing devices, and then a partner teacher device of the same manufacturer. So we narrowed it down to a Dell option, an HP option, and a Lenovo option. As you can see, I've been reasonably specific with the memory and storage desired and the screen size. It's important to note that we're looking for the newest model in all of these scenarios. For example, I know that the Dell Chromebook 3189 is not yet available, but we'd like to get proposals for that so that when it is released, we can place that order. Similarly, the HP Chromebook X360, which is a flip tablet model, has not yet been formally released, and but that would be the teacher model for this particular option. The one other thing that vendors should know, if, for example, if you're not Dell, HP, or Lenovo directly, we'll accept proposals for more than one of these devices. So if you're a reseller for both, say, HP and Lenovo, you can include information about both of those options and pricing for both of those options in your proposal. The one other requirement for this proposal is that you or a partner of yours offer a lease financing. In discussions with our board, our superintendent, and our business department, we have a strong interest in leasing the equipment rather than purchasing for a variety of reasons. And we're looking at both a 3- and a 4-year lease option. So that will be required, but again, your firm, the proposing firm, does not have to be the one offering the lease financing, just as long as the financing partner, information about the financing partners provided in the proposal, that will be fine. We expect that the board will prefer a 4-year lease agreement, but we'd like to look at a 3-year for comparison purposes. We pass through our one-to-one device costs to the students and parents in the form of textbook rentals. So there's a strong desire and commitment by our board to not raise the textbook rental fee and to lower it if possible. As such, a 4-year lease option is most likely, but we expect vendors to provide both the cost numbers for both of those. The other important thing here in section 2.2 is you see the numbers. So we're looking at 1,440 student devices and 120 teacher devices. The other important note is that we may not necessarily lease the teacher devices because that comes out of a different funding source. So even though the cost forms require a lease financing for those 120 teacher devices as well, we may purchase them outright. So that is an important distinction to know as you're preparing your proposal. And then lastly here in section 2.3, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we are interested in value-added services. As we were putting together this RFP, we wanted to make it clear that we're interested in these services, but they are not mandatory for us. So if you're looking at section 2 here, subsections 2.1 and 2.2 are mandatory for every proposing vendor. The value-added services are optional. That would include things like extended warranties, repair services, white glove configuration setup services. Our approach as a technology department is to prefer turnkey solutions or one-stop shops, and so if we can bundle those types of services in, that's ideal for us. That said, the reason we consider Section 2.3 optional is that we have vendors who will provide all of those things currently. Vendors that may not sell the devices themselves, that might provide repair services, or insurance providers that might pull together a warranty, and we can also do all of those things in-house, internally. Right now, we do our own configuration and setup. We also self-insure. So we have some options. Our goal with the RFP was to get additional information, and if we can streamline any of that by utilizing a vendor that's also selling us the equipment, then we will do so. Okay, evaluation criteria and vendor selection. So this is a summary of how we're going to evaluate the responses to the RFP, the proposals. There's basically two phases. One is administrative screening. The second is proposal evaluation. The administrative screening can be summed up simply as minimum requirements for vendors. So, if you've never sold one-to-one devices to a school district before, if you've never provided, white glove or repair services and you're proposing those things, we're basically going to throw the proposal out. We want to simplify the process as much as possible, so there is a requirement that you've had 3 references with K-12 schools and selling the particular, selling one-to-one devices and providing any additional services that you're proposing. So that's the administrative screening portion. And then we move on to the response evaluation. So those vendors which pass the administrative screen, which will probably be all of them. I think in over a decade of doing this, I think I've only had to throw 1 proposal out for not meeting minimum requirements. So that should be fine. Then we'll move on to evaluating the proposals themselves. Obviously, as I've suggested before, we pass through our device cost to the students, so cost is the most important thing for us. It has to be weighted the most. We'll use the information in the detailed pricing forms to calculate a cost score. I'll show you those forms shortly. The one other important thing to note here, and I don't think I wrote it in the narrative, is that we'll be calculating the cost score only on the student devices. As I mentioned, the teacher devices, we have the option to purchase them or to lease them. We have different funding sources for the teacher devices, so we have some flexibility there. So we expect vendors to provide cost and price information for the teacher devices, but the actual cost score will be strictly on the student device itself. And we will do a per device cost comparison. So even though, we add it all up and it's a big amount, we're going to divide that out by the number of students. So this section here where it says cost 600 points simply just shows you how we'll calculate the score for cost. The next evaluation criteria is technical specifications. So I think the important thing to note, excuse me, with the technical specifications is that we did select 3 finalist devices, and we are instructing vendors to provide costs for models with the same amount of memory and the same amount of storage, etc. So even though the technical specifications are critical for us, it will probably serve to be more of a tiebreaker among proposing vendors, if vendors end up with a similar score for pricing or vendor qualifications. Now, there are small differences between the various devices, and our evaluation team, I've not discussed this with them in detail, but I do know they have slight preferences of one or the other. So, but for the most part, this can be considered a tiebreaker. The one other important thing is from the teachers and administrators' perspective, and I've described it here in this section, they're going to look mostly for ease of use, look and feel, rugged design, touchscreen performance. They're not going to look at the hardware inside. We've narrowed that down with the finalists to cover that piece. The next criteria is vendor qualifications. As I mentioned, it's critical that the vendors have a background in selling one-to-one devices, and if there are additional services as repair, extended warranty, that they also have experience doing those things as well, and that they have 3 reasonable references provided. I would also say that this vendor qualifications piece could be somewhat of a tiebreaker as well. For example, if 2 vendors propose the Lenovo option and the pricing is almost the same, and they're proposing the same exact device, then the vendor qualifications would make the difference between who we select. And then finally, we do have a vendor preference, small portion, just 50 points, but it is helpful to us to have vendors who are nearby in the area, and so we prefer vendors that are within 100 miles. Typically, that's the Indianapolis area, but it could be other directions as well. And as I close out talking about these evaluation criteria too, I should note that each of these reference the vendor response forms, or the document that vendors will submit, that they'll use to submit that information. So, for example, vendor preference, that information will be provided in Form 8 of the vendor response forms, and that's how we'll determine the vendor scores for that item. These last 2 subsections in Section 3, Section 3.2 and 3.3, these are, for the most part, standard RFP language. It allows us to have some flexibility. For example, if one bid comes in far different or far better than we expected, and we need to do some additional due diligence, this will allow us to make adjustments to the selection process as needed. It will also allow us to negotiate a contract, and then if that negotiation falls through, then move to another vendor. I will say that, as I mentioned earlier with the minimum requirements, I've rarely ever had to use this. It's more likely that we would utilize Section 3.3, best and final offer, although I don't anticipate it in this situation. But if we get, for example, a virtual tie between 2 vendors or 2 devices, then we may contact those vendors directly and ask them to submit a BAFO, a best and final offer. And in that scenario, we would obviously not make our goal date of March 14th, but if the evaluation scores and the vendor's proposals turned out that way, then we would have good rationale for going ahead and doing a best and final. All right, Section 4 is the last portion of Part 1 here. And again, Part 1 is the bulk of the RFP. Section 4 simply describes how vendors should submit their proposal, what should be included. 4.1 just notes what I mentioned earlier, that all of the documentation and information we've posted to the website and it's included within the RFP documents should provide everything you need to respond and to submit a proposal. If there are some gaps or things missing, the hope is that it's covered today in the pre-proposal conference, or it's covered in the answers to written questions tomorrow. Section 4.2 just talks about the format, and really this is almost like a narrative checklist for all of you to ensure that you've got the right documents before you ship them in. So the first is the response cover page. This is really just a signature page. It needs to include a signature from someone authorized to make a bid or submit a quote for your company. So that can just sit on top and of your response, and also I'm going to walk through all of these shortly as well, so you'll get to see them here in the pre-proposal conference. Second item is vendor response forms. Again, we'll walk through those shortly. Those contain the narrative about your company and the services you're offering. So if there's white glove service, if there's accidental damage protection, it also includes some information about your references and what distinguishes you from the competition. The detailed pricing forms, this is just where you plug in the prices for the device and for the lease financing, as well as the optional services. Again, we'll go through that as well. Reference form is just a form for you to provide your references, so then we have them in a standard format. Product invoice order form, that would be your standard quote or invoice that you would send us if we purchased the devices. Again, this can just be a sample. This is for our reference purposes. And then a sample lease agreement. So this is required. So all of these first 6 items are required. And as I mentioned, we're highly interested in leasing the equipment. And so this will need to be included with the proposal. And as I mentioned earlier, it can come from a financing partner or the vendor directly, either is fine. These next 3, 7, 8, and 9, are optional and only need to be included if your firm is proposing these services. So an extended warranty option, an accidental damage protection option, or a menu of equipment repairs. The one thing I want to say too, and we'll mention it again when we go through the vendor response forms, is I understand that sometimes extended warranty will overlap with accidental damage, will overlap with lease agreement, depending on how your company approaches those services, and that's fine. So, for example, if your extended warranty option includes accidental damage, then you do not need to provide the accidental damage information. You can simply say it's included within extended warranty, or it's included within a lease agreement, etc. So, but in any case, these 3 are optional. So if your firm prefers just to sell the devices and provide the lease financing, then that's fine as well. And then lastly, the proposed equipment technical specification. So this one is required, but it can simply be spec sheets or marketing brochures or user manuals that have the documentation about the device itself. All right, so that's the bulk of it. Let's dive into the other documents in just a moment. Okay, part 2, this is the mailing label. This is really just an administrative tool. So make sure that you print this out and affix it to the mailing envelope or the box that you're shipping in. This is really to help me organize the responses and to ensure that our administrative staff, our secretaries and support folks don't misplace it. When they see this on the top, they know what to do with it. I mentioned this one earlier. This is the proposal cover page. This also reiterates the list of items that should be included in the proposal. But more importantly, it's really the signature sheet. So whoever's authorized to submit the bid should sign and print their name on this sheet so that we can make official communications about selection, or if someone else is selected. Basically, this will be our primary contact once the proposals are submitted. The other thing to note on this one is it contains some FOIA language. This is helpful to us. So if you have proprietary materials, whether it's device specifications or something about the way you provide service or your pricing structure, please mark yes on this cover page, and then also make a point to provide those page numbers in your response. So that way, if it does ever come up, we know what to exclude from any FOIA requests that are related to this procurement. That really helps us a lot. And it also ensures that we don't give out any of your information. All right, the vendor response forms, as I mentioned, this will be the probably bulk of what you'll work on to respond. But hopefully I've made it as simple and straightforward as possible. So there's table of contents here. We'll scroll down. Form 1 is essentially a checklist of you telling us what you're proposing. So, and I need to change that. So we'll make that adjustment and post it. So obviously equipment and lease financing are required. The other remaining items are completely optional. And we just ask that you check yes or no so that we know what is included in your proposal. Also note at the bottom I've included classroom management software. That was not in part 1 simply because we don't need additional information about that. We simply would like a quote. So if you offer classroom management software, that would be like a Land School or a GoGuardian or a Dino, then you could check that box and just simply include it as a quote. And then again, so hopefully this is helpful too. This is the third place where we've identified all of the elements that you should be including in your proposal. And this one is actually your checklist to make sure that you've covered everything. And once again, these three are optional. Form 2 is minimum requirements. So as I mentioned, this is just kind of a hoop that we have folks to jump through just to make sure that we're not getting, some vendor working out of their garage that wants to do this for the very first time. So 3 years of providing one-to-one computing devices and services, and then list the references there. Form 3 is your executive summary. So this is really your value proposal, what distinguishes you from the competition, what sets you apart. So this is free form, however you would like to respond and what you think the best option or the best characteristics of your firm are in terms of providing us with one-to-one devices and associated services. Note that this is capped at 1 page. And then the next few forms all apply to the vendor qualifications evaluation criteria. So here first we have company profile, background, name of company, parent company, type of company, number of years under ownership, basically facts and figures about your company. Some vendors are reluctant to provide revenue information or net income. And if that's the case, then just type in the box appropriately. We do prefer to have that information just so we know, for example, if we're buying, $400,000 of devices, we'd like to know that the company, is sufficiently large enough to purchase those devices themselves also before selling them to us. So it is valuable information, but I understand that some companies have policies against that. This is often a page that ends up being part of the FOIA, this proprietary information that we restrict from FOIA requests as well. So simply company background here. And this is probably the bulk of what you'll be filling out to if you are offering value-added services. We included some questions that we'd like to know. And even if you're not offering value-added service, you should go through these questions and make sure whether or not they apply to what you're proposing. So the first question here is letting us know where your service and support staff are. So if you're providing warranty service or repairs, we'd want to know that, or even white glove services. Second question focuses on lease agreements. The one element that we'd like a narrative description about regarding the lease agreements is, would we have the ability to upgrade the devices in midstream? So we do a 4-year lease. Do we have the option to trade those devices in after 2 years, for minimal or no cost, depending on resale value? So presumably that would be included in the lease terms and conditions as well, but we would like to highlight that particular element here in a separate narrative. Number 3, basic manufacturer warranty, what's included? Does that cover accidental damage? How much? Number 4, extended warranty. So if the manufacturer warranty is 1 year, how do we get a 2 or 3 or 4 year warranty? Does that come from you? Does that come from the manufacturer? And what are the characteristics of that extended warranty? Does it include accidental damage? Does it only include a manufacturer defect or a failure? So that should go into question 4. And question 5 is what I mentioned earlier as well. Does the lease, come with some sort of accidental protection or extended warranty, or does it not? Which takes precedence? I know there are various ways to structure those types of agreements in terms of lease, warranty, insurance, repair. So if there's additional narrative that you need to include to describe how those work together or not. That should be here in number 5. Number 6 would be if you offer repair services. You know, in lieu of an accidental damage protection, if we decided to simply just repair them as needed, you know, does your company provide those services, and what are the costs? And then number 7, that's the white glove service. So that includes, you know, asset tagging, profile configuration, setup of the equipment. And I know everyone approaches that a little differently as well, but please describe those services here in section 7, and the cost will go for those will go on the detailed pricing forms. Form 6, as I mentioned, we are evaluating options for classroom management software. This has been included in the RFP for the same reason I mentioned earlier about a one-stop shop. If we can do everything with one vendor, that's easier and preferable to us. That said, we do not need detailed information about the software. We've done demos of all of these softwares, webinars. We also have documentation on all of these solutions. So we're only asking that if vendors proposing the devices also want to propose the classroom management software, that they simply provide a quote for the appropriate number of devices. And then Form 7, that would be the technical specifications. And again, like Form 6, there's no narrative really required here. You can simply attach the quote. For Form 7, also, there's no narrative required here. You can simply attach user manual, specification sheet, marketing brochure, as long as that includes all the technical specifications. That will be fine. And then lastly, Form 8, that is the company location. As I mentioned, we have a preference for vendors that at least have a service office or a regional office nearby. And then are you a current NHJ vendor? So that's part 4 of the vendor response forms. That's probably where the bulk of your efforts will go in response to our RFP. A couple more elements though. Part 5, the detailed pricing forms. So this is an Excel document, and the goal here is to simply provide an apples-to-apples comparison between vendor proposals for us. So because this is a separate document, on the first tab here, we include proposer name, mailing address, and the contact information. And I seem to have lost the boxes here. So the other thing on this first tab is to put an X in the boxes here next to the items that you're proposing. Obviously, equipment and lease financing are required. These other three are optional. Not sure why I lost the box. I will double check that. More importantly, though, is the second tab where you input the pricing. And as I've mentioned at the beginning and probably repeated more than necessary, we're trying to make this as simple as possible. So on this pricing tab, we've included a table for each of the finalist options. We have a Dell, HP, and a Lenovo in alphabetical order. And you simply need to complete the ones that you're proposing. This could be one or more. The other thing to note is that you only need to complete the white boxes. So there's a list cost, and the list cost is actually optional because the cost and information is calculated using the discounted cost. So bottom line, the white cells under per unit discounted costs need to be completed. The per unit list cost is optional. Once you put it in here, I'll demonstrate. So let's just say that's, I'm just pulling this out of my thin air. Let's say it's $279, and then the total cost appears. So you should use the line item cost and the subtotal cost to check your information, because I'm sure that your product quote will have the total, but you really only need to fill out these white cells here. So if, for example, if the 3180 is 279, then I have a total cost of 401,000 for the student devices. And then the lease financing cost, and I know this might be a little backwards from how it's done. Typically, you'll get 401,000, and then you'll get a total lease amount or financing cost associated with that amount. But in this case, we'll need you to back that out and reverse engineer it effectively. So, if I have a lease, a lease cost of let's say it's 40,000. We don't want people to type it in here. We need you to divide the 40,000 by the 1540 to get that answer. So we could do it this way. We could say our lease cost is 40,000, and then divide it by 1540. So we'll do it that way. But please do not type in the purple cells, because it will break the formulas, and then we may evaluate the score incorrectly, which we do not want to do. But aside from that, that should cover it. We have broken this down, hopefully. So mandatory pricing, which is the device and the lease financing, is in the top section, and then the optional services is in the bottom section. So these only need to be completed in the bottom section if you're offering these services. But again, the important point to note is it's a per device price, and that the formulas are calculated under the discounted cost column, which is column E. And it goes the same for each of them. I will note that because pricing is not available yet for the HP Chromebook X360, that it is struck out. But keep in mind that our cost scoring is only going to be based on the student device. So there's no concerns there, the per device pricing and the Lenovo option. So that is part 5. And then last but not least is part 6, the reference forms. And this is very straightforward. We're just requiring 3 references. So you would include that here on the reference form. The client would be the school corporation name. The contact would be the individual that we would contact. We may or may not follow up on references. It's certainly a possibility, but this should be pretty straightforward to complete. So that covers all of the RFP forms. The only thing beyond the RFP forms are just the additional documentation required. So the product invoice and order form, any technical specifications, and information about your additional services. So I'll hop back really briefly to the presentation before we wrap up here. Back to the slideshow. So just to recap the evaluation criteria, the first step is pass-fail, just to make sure that all the vendors who submit a proposal have the requisite experience and qualifications. And then the response evaluation, 60% or 600 points for cost, 20% or 200 points for technical specifications, 150 points or 15% for vendor qualifications, and then 50 points or 5% for existing vendor relationship. As I mentioned too, the bottom, or the criteria aside from cost will likely serve as a tiebreaker. Obviously, with technical specification, there's only 3 models being proposed. So anyone proposing the same device is going to have an equivalent score there. So just keep that in mind. And while we do think that those 3 items are very important, they certainly pale in comparison to the cost score. And then just to recap the timeline here, today, please provide any written questions that you still have. We can cover them here in the pre-proposal conference, though, and avoid that if possible. The response deadline next Monday at noon. Please make sure you have them shipped out before the weekend or on Saturday. And we're hoping to choose the devices within a week. And part of the way we can do that as I mentioned, there's only 3 devices. So I'm going to work with our team to come up with a device score for the technical specifications in advance. And we'll also have our cost analysis built so that we only have to plug in the numbers. So we're hoping that we can move through that fairly quickly and evaluate mostly the vendor forms and vendor qualifications. And then we're hoping to have a recommendation by March 14th, the following week. If that has to be delayed, it will be delayed as little as possible. Okay, that's the end of me talking, thank goodness. And what I will do, just to facilitate this more smoothly and so that we don't accidentally have folks talking over one another, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box, and I will read the questions aloud and respond to them. And if there are questions I cannot answer right now, they will be posted in our responses to written questions. Also, while I'm talking, you feel free to go ahead and type in questions. I see some coming in. So yes, the one other thing, feel free to go ahead and type in the questions while I'm talking here. And if you have had all your questions answered, please post that in the chat box too. That way I know that we've gotten them all. So the first question is N22, the Lenovo N22 is end of life. Would it be okay if we propose N23? That's probably a typo on my part. It actually should be the N23, so I'll make a note to make that correction, but that's an excellent question. So if you're proposing the Lenovo option, please propose the N23. And for further clarification, for the student devices, we would prefer the N23 model that lays flat 180 degrees, but that does not go 360. That was not something that our evaluation team thought would be a good idea. And I will say, though, back to the Lenovo, for the teachers, we do want the 360 flip option, which is the Yoga, the 11E, the newest model. So another question, when are devices expected to be delivered? So we'd like them as soon as possible after the board approves the device. To be more specific, we'd like them by the end of April at the latest. We would like the entire month of May, which we're still in school, we would like that entire month to provide some teacher training and to have teachers to get in, to have an opportunity to handle their devices. The student devices we won't work on until summer begins. Next question, do we need Google Chrome management software? Yes, please include that. Please include that in the product invoice and order form or the quote. That said, I assume that it's a static price for that. Excuse me. So in any case, we hadn't considered using that as an evaluation point among vendors, like I said, because our assumption was the pricing would be the same. However, if for some reason you were able to offer a discounted price on the Chrome management software, include that in your narrative in the vendor response forms. So that way we can account for that. Another question, which white glove services would you be looking for? That would be all of the above. So the examples are load Google management licenses, asset tagging, do we have a liftgate for delivery? We do not have a liftgate for delivery, but we do have a loading zone with the double door. But yeah, in terms of white gloves, it would be all of the above that you offer. So asset tagging, loading management licenses, etc. And we'll take into account if there are slightly different, if there are slight differences between the services offered. You know, we'll account for that. And if there are dramatic differences in the services offered, that would be a situation where we'd go back to best and final if we felt that was necessary. Other questions? I'll let it go here for a minute or two, but if you have exhausted all your questions or you have no further questions, please go ahead and type that in the chat box. If you're still thinking, take your time. All right, it looks like there are no further questions, so that makes me happy. That means I covered almost everything on my own, so that's 2 thumbs up for that. But if you do come up with something else while talking to your colleagues or your supervisors, another question, as long as you get it to me by the end of the day, I will pull those up tomorrow morning and provide written responses. So thank you all for coming. Especially thank you for putting up with our technical difficulties at the beginning of the session. Good thing that I planned a little bit of extra time. And I will be posting this recording, if not today, by tomorrow, up on the website so that it will be viewable online, so that you can share that with colleagues or so that other folks not able to attend will be able to see it. So again, thank you very much for attending. I appreciate it, and I will now close out the session. Thank you.